All right. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a good walk and a healthy lunch. We're going to start this afternoon with Dr. Allison Kelleher talking to us about Spruce Pitch Lip Balm. And if you did take pictures on your walk, remember to use the pound SCF Plants 2020 on your social media to share the pictures so you can be put into a drawing. And so you could win some prizes. So I'm going to bring it up to the stage and we will introduce Dr. Allison Kelleher.
Tikahtnu, nice to see everyone. I am so excited to share with you the recipe for Spruce Pitch Lip Balm. You can also think of this as Spruce Pitch Salve. So what I've done ahead of time is heated up the oil so that the oil doesn't take as long, so we can see the whole process today. But let me give you an overview of how, if you want to make a medicinal oil at home, what you would need is oil to start with. So I prefer extra virgin olive oil, EVOO, because that is from a fresh plant. It comes from the first squeezing of the plant, the first pressing of the plant. And that means that there's more plant medicine in the plants, in the olive oil. So basically, the less heat and the less age that a plant is exposed to, the more healthful constituents it will often have. So I want a fresh oil. Our traditional oils would have been rendered fat. Particularly, I've been working with rendered moose fat. Other folks have sometimes used bear grease, but there are certain rules in my tribe around things like that. So traditionally we would use some kind of fat or oil, often applied to heat. A solid fat will turn to liquid. So for the purposes of this workshop, we'll use olive oil plus spruce pitch. So that is the sticky, hard resinous sap that is on the outside of spruce trees. And so this is an example. It's just a little sort of crystalline structure that you can pull off of your spruce trees, and it has a delightful aroma, and there are many active constituents of plant medicines or phytochemicals that are inside plants. So plants, just like us, are individuals, but they're filled with different chemicals and medicines that have complex interactions, and also once inside of our bodies can be processed into other kinds of medicines and have effects. So plants are really dynamic, wonderful medicines. So we'll use a safe non-toxic plant medicine with the caution that sometimes spruce can cause allergies. So in this case, I don't have allergies to spruce, and what I have done is taken the spruce resin or the spruce pitch, and I have soaked it inside olive oil for some time. So I usually use this for months, and will gently agitate the olive oil that I've poured over the spruce pitch so that the medicine goes in suspension. And what I mean by that is that the medicine gets dissolved from the hard spruce pitch and goes into solution in the olive oil liquid. So I like to make a lot of my medicinal oils slowly over time at room temperature by soaking a dry plant, or a dry resin in this case, in the oil. The other way you could make spruce pitch salve quickly, if you hadn't soaked this for months ahead of time, is to take fresh spruce pitch, usually the harder form, not the sticky form that will stick to your pots and pans and make them really hard to work with in the long run. So you want the harder, crunchier kind of spruce pitch, the stuff that you kind of can't see through. That's a little bit easier to work with. So what you would do if you were making this from scratch today is you would put about maybe a quarter to a half of a cup of spruce pitch per 1 cup of oil, and then you would cook it in a double boiler. But what I mean by that is something very specific. So let me explain a double boiler to you. I have a pot on top, and that pot has a bottom, and then the bottom pot actually has water in it, and it's boiling. So this is boiling water, and then there's a pot that nests on top of it so that the steam heats the oil rather than the oil being directly on the element. So that preserves the medicine in the oil, because much like us, plants are affected by heat, and too much heat can create oxidative stress and molecularly destroy some of the bioactive constituents inside plant medicine. So if you don't have a double boiler, you can also just take a pot that has boiling water and use a heat-safe Pyrex, and you can actually use that as a double boiler and put your medicine in the side of your measuring cup. But here, I'm fortunate enough to have this double boiler, and I have heated up my oil. And after the oil is heated, that is when I would add the spruce pitch. So I'll go ahead and do some of that. And the ratio that I've heard of the medicine is everywhere from the quarter to half cup per 1 cup ratio, or something like 50-50, 50% oil, 50% beeswax plus spruce pitch. So really, this is one of those things that you just get to know better as time goes by and as you get to know this plant medicine. So I'll tell you a little trick that I have for checking to see if the salve is thick enough, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So I'll take some of my spruce pitch that I traded for. Thank you, Pat Frank. So we were working on plant medicine last winter, and he collected some spruce pitch for me to use. So I'll put some in there, and I won't use quite as much as you might at home because I have already this very highly concentrated oil that I've been steeping in anticipation of this wonderful event for the past few months. So I'll mix that up a little bit and just kind of see how much heat I have in there. There's some heat. I don't anticipate that all of this resin will get melted down, so it's going to take a little bit of time for that to happen. I always keep the ends of my spoons very clean, especially when I'm making medicine for others. And I'll go ahead and pour some of this medicinal oil that I've already made ahead of time. And there's going to be a bit of pitch that comes out there. Wonderful. What I've also been taught is when pouring off this medicine, that I can also retain some of the bits and then remake a medicine oil. So say I have some spruce pitch here, and let's say I want to add some more of the spruce pitch that Pat Frank gifted to me, Brianna Pat. And let's say I want to get a new batch going for a future workshop. So I'll just take care of that. Add some more oil. And then I'll have oil going for my next medicine. It's really interesting when you make medicine, suddenly people will come to you asking, oh, my family, my sister, my brother, my somebody has eczema or arthritis, skin irritations, inflammation, pain, sore muscles. Those kinds of things can be alleviated by spruce pitch oil, which can be used medicinally in and of itself, but we're going to thicken it today with beeswax. So as this is heating, to put the spruce pitch in the oil infusion, I'll tell you a little bit about beeswax. So beeswax is a natural way to thicken oils. And traditionally what we would have done was just cool down our oil and it becomes solid at room temperature. But with olive oil, of course, it's liquid at room temperature. So adding the beeswax gives it that extra capacity to cover your skin for longer and for the medicine to stick onto the skin. So this is a wonderful beeswax in that it's already broken down into tiny little pieces, as opposed to the big bricks of beeswax that you have to grate by hand, and I find that a little bit trickier. So this oil is looking like it's getting nice and hot, and some of the resin is sticking to the bottom of the pan. So I know that it's melting and has been influenced by the heat. And I see that my double boiler still has water, so I'm always just checking to make sure that there's adequate heat there. And there's my oil turning more and more golden as time goes by. Sometimes I'll keep my plant medicine covered to hold the aromatics in and also hold the heat in. So that's something else that we often consider, not just when making oils, but also when making a tea. And I can also tell you, as this is heating, that one really exciting thing I was learning about in regards to spruce tips and them being high in vitamin C is that vitamin C can be very helpful in decreasing the duration and severity of viral upper respiratory infections. And it also, in particular during coronavirus season, has been helpful in certain studies in stopping that secondary inflammatory reaction that has tended to cause problems between day 7 to day 10 for folks with the pulmonary or the lung complaints. So there is some good evidence that's been put out by the University of Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine, and those folks recently published an article about natural and integrative supplement-like treatments for prevention and treatment of coronavirus. So I think I just wanted to mention that so that we're aware that our medicines have a place in antiviral treatment and in minimizing the impact potentially of various viruses and other infections. So I'm going to mix this up again, and then we will strain it, and after straining it, we can simply thicken it with the beeswax, and voila, we have our wonderful salve. Or you can also put it in these tiny little beeswax or the tiny little lip balm tubes that make it just easier to bring around with you. More portable. Okay, so I still have some bigger pieces of the spruce pitch, but that's okay because I'll just filter them out, and I could choose to reuse them, or I might gift them back to the earth. So I was taught to often gift to the east and west when gifting back to plants, but specifically to put earth plants, stuff from the earth back with an earth plant, or stuff from the ocean, back in the ocean, stuff from the river back in the river. So medicine, so the scraps from making medicine, to me, don't ever go in the trash. They always go back to nature. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to be very, very careful because this is hot and resinous. And I'm going to pour this off by using cheesecloth. And I'm going to make this a single, maybe a thinner layer of cheesecloth. And then what I can do is hold it very, very carefully so as not to burn myself. And I'm going to balance it precariously there. Maybe I'll balance it on this other one. Okay, good. I'll pour it back in there. Okay, so I have my cheesecloth over my strainer. Metal strainer. Preferably things are metal because the heat would leach plastic toxins out, so just be aware of that. I tend to use stainless steel or glass. That's what my teachers taught me. So I'll take this hot oil that has the spruce pitch in it and just gently pour it through the cheesecloth. Okay, there's still some pitch stuck to the bottom of this buddy. So I'll try to get that off as best I can because I want to reuse this container. It's always nice to have multiple spoons to work with. Oh, good. So it's coming off pretty nice. That's great. And then, after you make your infused oil, we can thicken that with beeswax, but you could certainly use this oil at this state. So there's no particular reason that you couldn't use this oil as a massage oil or as an oil for sores or injuries or any particular complaint, really. So I'm just going to place this over here and then take this oil, put it back in here. It smells great, by the way. So we've taken the spruce pitch out of the oil, and now we just have a plain medicine oil with the spruce medicine inside the oil. Some people would keep their medicine oils in a fridge or a freezer for years if they want to preserve it for longer. I find it can be kept for months at room temperature. If sort of the sooner that you use medicines, sometimes the better. I'm going to let some of this just continue to heat up, and I will see if it is time to thicken this with beeswax by adding a little bit of beeswax. So turn it on full heat. So my trick for checking if your salve is ready is to have a tiny spoon or a regular size spoon, but I like them to be tiny because my freezer is always full. So put a tiny spoon in the freezer, and then when it's nice and cold, you can apply it to your oil after it has some beeswax and see if the cold spoon creates the consistency that you're looking for in your medicine. So a cold spoon will sometimes help us to do that better. So it looks like the wax is starting to melt a little bit, so that's pretty exciting. And I'm going to add a little bit more wax here, melt that up. I know a lot of people measure their stuff and label their stuff. My teachers told me that you can, but certainly I usually just eyeball it. So I figure I'm going to need 1/4 to 1/2 of my of the ratio of what I see. So total amount of oil, I'm going to need 1/4 to half of that to thicken this up. So I could measure this. The ratio I gave you in the recipe is like, the ratio I've read about is 38 milliliters, which is 2 tablespoons of the beeswax per cup of olive oil. But I think it just really depends on how thick you like your own oil and the art of making medicine. So how familiar you get with the process. You can always heat it up and put more oil in it if you need to. Just make sure you use a double boiler and careful not to injure yourself with the heat, because dealing with hot oil it demands respect. So I'm just going to apply this beeswax at approximately I'm going to say about 1/3. That's what I'm going to do. And then I almost always need to add more, so I'm going to add more. That way I won't ruin my cold spoons. I have a couple cold spoons hiding somewhere. Okay. So I've used about 1/2 pound of beeswax per approximately 3/4 liter of olive oil. And I'm just going to stir that until the little tiny bits of beeswax melt and until the oil is completely clear. And the next step will be for us to pour this salve off into containers, allow it to cool completely, and then cover it for storage and use. So almost all of the beeswax is melted. And one thing to keep in mind is that moisture is not our friend when it comes to making medicine oils, because water is something that things like bacteria and other pathogens can use to grow in. So we always want to keep water as best we can out of our medicine oils. And that's part of the reason that I was taught to mostly use dry plants. Some people do use moist or fresh plants. You just kind of have to be an expert and know what you're doing and know how to pour the oil off the top so that there's not, so you don't get the water that's sunk to the bottom. So those are just words to the wise. Sometimes people will also add vitamin E, like a vitamin E capsule, and squeeze that in. And right after we add the beeswax, that would be an appropriate time to add the oil. I also today brought some spruce essential oil. That's been shown to be, in some studies, to be helpful for people who have pain or peripheral neuropathy, or particularly even, according to the German Commissioning monographs, which is a great resource, it can be helpful for people with painful joints in rheumatism or rheumatoid arthritis. Okay, so I feel like that might be thick enough. I'm going to turn this off because it's definitely melted. And I'm going to add a little more beeswax because that's always a smart thing to do. To me, I just rather have it set up than it be liquid still. So, and I think we might have sent someone to get my wonderful tiny little spoons that I stored in the freezer. That way we'll be able to tell how thick it is. So I could also just take this other spoon and let it dry, or actually I want to use one that's clean. Or I can just let it set up. Oh, look at that. So it set up pretty quick. So I just dip in a coolish spoon and it sets up decently. It feels pretty good. Pretty good consistency, not too hard, not too greasy. Kind of want to slather that on. Yum. Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, so next step is let's put this wonderful oil, the medicinal spruce oil, into containers while carefully not burning oneself. Hey, thank you. I can't thank you enough. I'm so grateful. Okay, great. So here's my cool technique, just so you know. You can have a very cold spoon and then dip it in, and voila, you'll have the full effect of your future ointment, which, it's pretty good. Perfect. Okay, great. So I find it helpful to pour into a measuring cup that has a spout so as to really direct the medicine oil and waste less of it. So you'll understand that here in a second what I mean. So I'm just going to pour this off. Oh, I put some water in there. So I'm going to dry it off again because I accidentally put some water in the container. So I don't know if you could see that on video, but when I was pouring from my double boiler, the bottom of my pot put some moisture in here, and that is not what I want. Okay, cool. So I brought a special tool because sometimes this happens, and so I have this handy stainless steel funnel, which I really like, and don't leave home without, apparently. And so let's see if we can get this. There we go. Okay. All right, let me just put that in there. Okay. So we're going to pour this into these containers to make lip balm. And you'll notice that the solution cools over time. Sometimes if you don't want to use as much of the lip balm, if you don't want to fill up the whole thing, you can twist your lip balm tube so that you save medicine and maybe only fill it up halfway. That's another trick that I learned from my teachers, just in case you have potlatch and have a lot to make and you didn't put vitamin E in it and you want to just have it used quickly. Okay, cool. So those guys are just cooling, and I'll pour the rest of these in there. Let's see if it'll work. It still will. Okie dokie. Okay. Voila, the pot isn't in too bad a shape, which is great because when you're dealing with spruce pitch, sometimes that is really sticky. So let's just pour the rest of this in here, making this wonderful spruce pitch lip balm / salve. Super aromatic. Okay. So I forgot to put the essential oil in, but before I poured this out, that would have been a good time to do it. You don't want to put your essential oils in if you like using oils, like wild orange is another really wonderful scent, but anyways, you don't want to put them in while you're actively heating your medicine. You only would prefer to put them in after things are already heated. Okay, so with that, we have these tubes of lip balm that we'll be setting up, and then when those cool, you'll just be ready to apply them. So you can apply them to chapped skin, abrasions, injuries, or pain, and I hope you enjoy your adventures with Spruce. Koyana anabasi.
Thank you, Allison. So we do have questions, and the first one is, well, um, the spruce pitch was seeping. Did you store it in a dark and cool place? Also, did you have to burp it once a day until it settled?
So yes, I did store it in a dark, cool place. I generally store all of my plant medicines in darker or cooler places. And the reason is because sunlight can make chemical reactions happen. And so I have a background in chemistry. And so what I like is to try to suspend medicines in their original state as much as possible. So when I steep the spruce in oil, I keep it in a dark place, and I don't necessarily burp it every day, but I would burp it maybe once a week. And certainly I think you could take the cap off and let it aerate daily. I just wasn't taught that that was completely necessary with this. So with my spruce and my cottonwood oils, I let them soak for a longer amount of time and shake or agitate them, mix them, and then open the container about once a week.
And then how long did you say you normally have them sit in before you make them into anything?
So people have taught me that you can keep some kinds of oils for longer durations of time. So certain healers have told me you can keep medicines in suspension in oils for years, and because there's medicine in the plants that will prevent the decay of the medicine. I typically use, so for spruce, this guy has been soaking since, probably the past 7 months. So that's part of the reason it's pretty strong oil. But certainly you could soak the oil for a matter of weeks and still get benefit. So I hope that's helpful. Really, that's a nuance of your own traditional knowledge and where you get your information from. So one of my teachers taught me that she keeps her infusions going. So she'll pour off her oil and then continue to add more oil for years.
And then what is the shelf life of the salve? Like what you just...
So the shelf life of the salve would be as long as it looks good and does not have any evidence of rot. So in this case, what we've done is made tiny lip balm tube containers so that I anticipate they'll be used within the next 3 to 6 months. In my experience with salves and lip balms that I've made in the past, they keep for years. I will just keep them in a cooler area. If I have a large amount of lip balms that I've made, I just keep them in a cooler area away from sunlight. Now, that isn't that they have officially been tested by the FDA for any potential microbes, et cetera, et cetera. It just, in my experience with plant medicine in salve form, they're more potent the sooner that you use them, but they can certainly still be used for a duration of time after. And if you're concerned about the shelf life of your salve, say for example, if I was making large containers and I was afraid that some of the water from the drip of the double boiler had gotten into my salve, I could, after it cools down and I cover it, I could keep it in the fridge to extend the shelf life, or I could freeze it potentially to extend the shelf life.
Is there a limit on how much you can or should use over time?
So that's a good question. If you have sensitivities to spruce, I would avoid using that. There are other considerations. So I mentioned cottonwood. Cottonwood is related to the willow family. Willow family is related to aspen. So just be aware of our sensitivities and listen to our body if you're not feeling well using something. In this case, it's a topical medicine, so we don't have to necessarily be as concerned about absorption and systemic whole body effects. So I do know that people drink spruce tea from the bark and from the needles, both early spring needles and mature needles. And folks seem to tolerate that just fine. But I don't think that people are ingesting, I don't know of people, and I wouldn't recommend ingesting a spruce oil like we've made today. This is more for topical and external use. So I don't know that you could put enough on your body to make you sick. As long as it was cooled down, one could probably cover oneself, and that might be a good treatment. So for severe eczema, when children who have a full body manifestation of their itchy rash, sometimes we'll have them put like a petroleum jelly on themselves, like a Vaseline with gauze. And so what I would use for myself with a history of eczema would be something like this, or something like just olive oil thickened with beeswax, and apply that wherever the rash is. So I don't think there's like an upper limits of what is safe for this particular topical medicine. That'd be how I think about it.
Awesome. Seeing the moose on the picture, so if people are using moose fat, caribou fat, or bear fat, do those ones need to be in the refrigerator or in freezer if they're using those, or is it also just a cool, dark place?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would use your knowledge and your elders' knowledge in the area and the knowledge from your area, and actively seek that out. But to me, traditionally, our plants were usually kept, our medicines were usually kept in a cool, dark place. So like in the cunnychuck or in the entryway, right, or someplace that under a bed, or someplace where there's where it's out of the way and cooler. So yes, you can keep it in the fridge. That's where I keep my medicines because they're so highly valued to me. So I haven't been storing my rendered fat at room temperature long term, but I can tell you that studies and literature would show that rendered fat, much like Crisco, can still be stable and non-toxic at room temperature. And you see this with rendered butter called ghee. So it's stable at room temperature and on the shelf on your counter for long, long periods of time. So the rendering, the cooking down of the fat helps to stabilize the polyunsaturated fatty acids, and it in and of itself, our traditional oils are medicine. So I would say let's keep the dialogue going and let's learn together, but I think that keeping those, as long as they don't, keeping traditional oils infused with medicines at room temperature on the counter is probably safe, but I would watch them for odor, and I would watch them for signs of discoloration, and I would watch them for signs of mold. I just haven't seen that yet for me personally, and my oils like that are kept in the fridge long term because I value them a lot.
This one says vitamin E can be added. Are there other vitamins or non-plant oil to the salve?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So thanks for asking. You know what I was just learning about is raspberry. So raspberry seed oil is a natural, it's a natural sunscreen. SPF, that's the word I was looking for. So I haven't experimented much with this, but I do have a bottle of raspberry seed oil, and I've been really interested in natural forms of sunscreen to lead to less toxicity of ourselves and our planet. So that's so stay tuned. What I would do is add that after. I might add that just before I thicken the beeswax, actually, just before I add the beeswax. I don't know. As long as it's hot enough and it'll go into suspension, you could put the raspberry oil and the vitamin E. A lot of our Alaskan plants are known to be pretty high antioxidant, antibacterial, antifungal, and so the plants in and of themselves will have preservative properties. But certainly if you're using a plant, for example, like aloe, if you're familiar with aloe, or like chickweed, these sort of more fleshy plants, they have more moisture in them, then you would want to think a lot harder about preserving and then keeping in the fridge. Hope that's helpful.
Yes, that is helpful. All right. Any other words? Can you talk a little bit about how long you let them stay open before you cover all of them with lids?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I'm going to show you here a little bit about how to do that. So we have these really convenient container holders. Well, that made it nice so I didn't spill everywhere. I still spilled a little. Whoops. Sorry about that, everybody. So it's still a little warm to the touch, and that tells me I probably don't want to cap it yet because I can feel that it's warmer than my temperature. So it's warmer than like 97.3, 97.6, whatever our current temperatures are, right? So I would let it cool down to room temperature so I don't feel like it's hot anymore, so it's not going to sweat when I put the lid on. So it has to be solid, which this is, and it looks opaque, so I can't see through it anymore. It looks more like a yellow kind of like a yellow ointment or a yellow salve instead of that see-through golden olive oil type appearance. So I'd make sure that it cools down to room temperature, and if you have any question, let it cool for longer. If you're concerned about particles getting into your medicine, I often just cover it with a really clean cloth or some fresh paper towel to try to protect it from if I'm doing other things, so that things don't fall into your medicine.
Awesome. Very good. All right. I don't see any other questions coming through, so thank you, Allison.